There's a quiet kind of moment that shows up in All in the Family that doesn't look important at first. The kind of moment where nothing dramatic is happening, where the room is just existing in its usual rhythm. Someone moving through the kitchen, someone settling into a chair, someone making an offhand comment that isn't meant to carry any weight. And yet in certain episodes, especially the kind where Archie begins to sense, even if he doesn't say it out loud, that the world might be moving forward without him, that quiet moment starts to feel like the edge of something deeper. In this particular kind of story, the conflict doesn't come from a big event. It comes from a feeling, a subtle one at first, almost invisible, like the slow realization that the conversations happening around him don't center him the way they used to, that decisions are being discussed without his authority being assumed, that ideas are being introduced that don't require his approval to exist. And it's in those moments that Archie begins to react, not because someone has directly challenged him, but because something inside him feels unsettled. It often begins with Mike bringing up something that represents change, something tied to a broader shift happening outside that living room, maybe a conversation about work, maybe about politics, maybe about social expectations that are evolving in ways that don't align with Archie's understanding of how things are supposed to work. And Mike doesn't present it as a confrontation. He presents it as a discussion, something open-ended, something that invites thought rather than demands agreement. But that openness is exactly what creates the tension. Because for Archie, an open-ended conversation can feel like a lack of structure, a lack of certainty. And in that lack, there's a space where his voice might not carry the same weight it once did. And instead of sitting with that possibility, instead of acknowledging it even to himself, he reacts. Not explosively at first, not in a way that immediately turns the room into a battlefield, but in a way that feels controlled, almost measured, like he's trying to reassert something without making it obvious that he feels the need to do so. And the more the conversation continues, the clearer it becomes that his responses aren't just about the topic. They're about reclaiming a sense of importance. The living room becomes more than just a setting in these moments. It becomes a kind of arena where that sense of relevance is tested. Because everything happens there, every word, every reaction, every pause, and there's no distraction to pull the focus away. No external action to shift the energy. Just conversation, pure and uninterrupted. Gloria picks up on the tension in a way that feels deeply personal. Because for her, this isn't just about ideas, it's about her relationship with Archie, about the way he sees her, about whether he recognizes her as someone capable of forming her own perspective. And when he reacts in ways that feel dismissive or defensive, it doesn't just feel like disagreement, it feels like a kind of erasure. Moves through it all with that quiet warmth that never quite stops the conflict, but changes the way it unfolds, softening the edges, creating small moments where the conversation doesn't feel like it's collapsing under its own weight. And those moments matter, because without them, the tension might become too sharp, too overwhelming to sustain. And Mike, steady as ever, keeps the conversation going, not by overpowering Archie, but by refusing to step back, by continuing to speak, to question, to engage. And that persistence becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting back the gaps in Archie's responses, the places where certainty turns into repetition, where authority turns into insistence. Because that's what starts to happen as the episode unfolds. Archie begins to repeat himself, not in the exact same words, but in the same ideas, circling back to familiar ground, reinforcing the same points, and the more he does it, the more it feels like he's trying to hold onto something that's slipping, something that isn't being acknowledged the way it used to be. And that's where the comedy becomes layered, because on the surface, there's something funny about the way he talks, the way he reacts, the way he tries to dominate the conversation. But underneath that, there's something almost fragile about it, something that suggests the humor is covering a deeper discomfort. The show doesn't rush to explain that discomfort. It lets it exist. It lets you feel it. And that's part of what made it so groundbreaking when it first aired, because it treated its audience like they were capable of recognizing complexity, capable of seeing beyond the surface of a joke to the emotion underneath it. In the context of the 1970s, this kind of storytelling was doing something bold, because it brought real social tension into a format that had traditionally avoided it. It allowed characters to express viewpoints that were flawed, that were uncomfortable, that were shaped by fear and uncertainty, and it didn't immediately correct them or resolve them. Instead, it allowed those viewpoints to be challenged through conversation, through interaction, through the natural dynamics between characters. And in doing so, it created a space where the audience could engage with those ideas without being told exactly what to think. In this episode, the idea of fearing irrelevance becomes the emotional core, even if it's never stated directly. And you can see it in the way Archie reacts to moments where he's not the center of attention, where decisions are being discussed without him leading them, where the conversation moves forward without his approval being sought. He interrupts more, he speaks louder. He redirects the conversation, not because he has something new to add, but because he needs to be part of it, needs to feel like his presence still shapes the direction of the room. And the more he does it, the more it reveals what's underneath. Gloria's frustration grows in response to that, because she can feel the imbalance, the way the conversation becomes less about mutual understanding and more about control. And her reactions carry that weight, that sense that something deeper is at stake than just the topic being discussed. It continues to provide those moments of softness, those brief pauses where the tension eases, where the conversation feels like it might settle into something more balanced. But the underlying dynamic doesn't disappear. It just shifts, it adapts, it finds new ways to express itself. Mike keeps pushing, gently but consistently, and that persistence is important, because it prevents the conversation from collapsing into one voice. It keeps the space open, even when that openness creates discomfort. As the episode moves forward, there's no dramatic turning point, no moment where Archie suddenly realizes what he's feeling, no scene where everything is laid out clearly and resolved. Instead, there's a gradual change in energy, a slowing down, a kind of conversational fatigue that settles in as the intensity of the argument fades. And in that fading, there's a different kind of clarity, not about who was right or wrong, but about what was really driving the conflict. The need to feel relevant, the fear of being left behind, the discomfort of realizing that the world doesn't revolve around you the way it once seemed to. The humor remains, but it shifts, becoming quieter, more reflective, less about immediate laughter and more about recognition, the kind of humor that makes you think rather than react. Watching it now, it feels remarkably current, because the fear of irrelevance isn't tied to a specific time or place. It's something that shows up whenever change happens, whenever roles shift, whenever people find themselves in spaces that don't operate the way they used to. And that's part of why the show still resonates, because it captures that feeling without simplifying it, without turning it into a clear lesson or a tidy conclusion. It just presents it, lets it play out, lets the audience sit with it. Personally, I think that's what makes episodes like this so powerful. The way they trust you to see the layers, to recognize the emotion underneath the argument, to understand that what's being said isn't always the same as what's being felt. By the time it ends, there's no sense of resolution in the traditional sense, just a sense that the conversation has paused, that the dynamic will continue, that the same tensions will resurface in different forms, and that's what makes it feel real. It leaves you with that lingering thought, not about the specifics of the argument, but about the underlying emotion, about the ways people react when they feel like they're losing their place, about the ways they try to hold on to it, sometimes without even realizing why. And that's the quiet brilliance of the show, the way it turns something as simple as a living room conversation into something layered, something meaningful, something that stays with you not because it gives you answers, but because it reflects something true.